let's get to the 15th Semiosis 101 episode on general Peircean semiotic theory for illustrators and designers. Over the last 3 weeks we have dug deeper into the theory underpinning iconic, indexical and symbolic representation. Now this month we will explore the more philosophical underpinning behind iconic, indexical and symbolic representation. For the next few videos we will get all airy-fairy with Peirce's phenomenological roots to how sign action, semiosis, works. In around 10 minutes we will prep for this by exploring the philosophical idea of to the things themselves. In a Peircean context, we and our communications can be expressed in 3 philosophical states that Peirce calls Firstness, Secondness and Thirdness. What do these mean and how are they useful to visual communicators? Well, watch this video. How does a philosophical lens help designers and illustrators to connect better to the intended audience? Well, watch this video. It's all kicking off this month, so let's get on with it. This video will be another theory-packed 10 minutes of semiosis in designer-centric terms. So stay tuned, subscribe, hit the bell. Firstness, secondness, thirdness, go! Welcome to this week's talk. This is the 15th in season 1 so far, and we are going to, as promised from the previous videos, going to start jumping into the phenomenological underpinnings, the philosophical underpinnings of Peirce's semiotic theory of semiosis. To get to that point, what we're going to be looking at obviously is to the things themselves, but what are those things? Well, that's where this level of Peirce really is crucial to understand, and Peirce can be really quite obtuse in how he makes other people understand his thinking. So let me just try for illustrators and graphic designers to put it into a context that will actually mean something to you guys. So to help us, I'm going to be using some tweets from a Twitter account, CS Peirce Speaks. Where Peirce is really useful is because he approaches it from the angle of existing. As human beings, we exist. That's what makes us who we are. We exist in the world. And it's this ness part of firstness, secondness and thirdness we're going to be exploring. He uses the terms firstness, secondness and thirdness to describe 3 states, essentially of being, in which our functions operate. What we have here is a sense of what do these 3 terms mean, especially in the context of graphic design. Okay, so he talks about first, he talks about second, he talks about third. So just to quickly get a sense of what this means. The state of firstness is, from our perspective, trying to understand our target audience, a state of ideas. We'll explore that a bit further. Then the secondness is a state, as he says here, the end of things. So it's not the end of the world. It's the sense of, we've reached this point. This is what we now understand. That's what we're going to explore a bit later on. And then the state of thirdness, you'll see this time and time again every time we have these quotes. It's a state of mediation, of making sense of what we've experienced. So just hold those thoughts in your head as we move forward. In Peirce, when he talks about firstness and secondness and thirdness, is a case of building up the idea of being, existing independent of anything else, that these things exist. So I'll talk about it later on as a conclusion, but let's just quickly unpack this to something that you understand. Red, the colour red, it exists as red. Won't worry about the scientific explanation of why red is red and blue is blue, but we as human beings know that the colour red exists, and we know what the colour red is when we see it. And that is independent of anything else. So in the state of firstness, the colour red is red. We spot it, we understand it, we don't have to overthink it, we know red is red. But the second level, secondness, is the conception of being relative to something else. So if you start applying to the colour red, red means rage, red means this, red means that, red means something else, Then as soon as you enter that point where you start to make relations of something that exists like red to red, oh, that's a raging colour, that's angry, then as soon as you make that connection, or your target audience makes that connection, that is when the state of secondness happens. It's when you actually then definitely get to a point of, yeah, red, oh, that is rage, that is anger. That is when we're at the state of thirdness. It's not just relative to, it becomes it. It's been mediated to be that. But it's still red. In other contexts, in other situations, it might mean something else, or it might just stay as red. Doesn't matter. But it's when somebody makes those connections going firstness, secondness, thirdness, that it works up to that level. Okay, let's move forward to something that we've encountered before in earlier talks, when we start talking about Peirce's obtuse language. Now, he uses 3 terms to describe what happens within semiosis, within sign action. The object, its representment, and its interpretant. But we are approaching this in Semiosis 101 from a designer-centric perspective. So I have replaced object with a designer-centric term that we're all familiar with as illustrators and designers, the concept we need to visually communicate. So the concept is object in Peirce's language. How we represent that, Peirce refers to that as the representment, but we will refer to that as the visual language we choose to cause the representation of the concept to visually communicate that. How the audience interprets that, that's where Peirce's language of interpreting comes in, but we will just still use the language of what we're understanding our target audiences do, which is interpret what we put together. So we're talking here connotatively rather than denotatively. So we're not having to worry too much about Peirce's language, because that's what Semiosis 101 is all about. So forget about the 3 terms on the right-hand side at the top and the 3 terms at the bottom, because we're not going to unpack what they mean yet. That's going to be Season 2, Season 3 next year. We've already, in Season 1, unpacked icon, index, and symbol. So if you want to check them out, videos 10 to 14 and the omnibuses in between, they're all the ones that are unpacking icon, index, and symbol, iconic, indexical, and symbolic representation in visual communication design, illustration and graphic design. Check them out for those ones. What we're going to look at here is how those states of firstness, secondness, and thirdness correspond to Peirce's 3 levels of how semiotics power works. Okay, firstness, you can see at the iconic level and on the corresponding levels on the right hand side is all within the state of firstness. That's where we know when we see red, it's red. Okay, that's red. Indexically, then you can start going, red for fire, red for rage, red for this, red for that. That's when we have a relation of what we see red as to something else. And then at the symbolic level is when it becomes that. When we see red in this context, it means that. Think of the Soviet flag, the communist flag, the red flag. It means something else than just a red flag. So that's where the state of thirdness comes in, where it's mediated to become that. So you can see within those 3 levels of how Peirce's sign action through the triads, it goes from simple to complex. Firstness leads to secondness, and firstness and secondness is then come to a mediated agreement when we reach a level of thirdness. So what does this mean for illustrators and designers? Well, again, in videos 7 and 8, I started to introduce you to Peirce's big concept that he defines 10 levels of semiotic sign, from the simple to the complex, from sign 1 being the simple, sign 10 being the most complex. And we've seen that already, as I say, in videos 7 and 8, where the first corner of that inverted pyramid are the iconic signs, the bottom part of it, bottom 4, are indexical signs, and the top right hand corner are symbolic signs. So what we have here is a sense of, in the 10 signs going from simple to complex, and each of them having complexity, we have the iconic representation, indexical representation, symbolic representation, taking the focus depending on what this type of sign power has got. But let's just explore that a little bit further in the context of this phenomenological states of firstness, secondness, and thirdness. So firstness is sign 1 is the pure sign of firstness, because that's where you acknowledge red. Just using that as our example again, red. Okay, red is just red. You acknowledge it, but in your head you're already starting to think, well, red, I know red means something else, or whatever colour it is, or whatever it is. That means something else. As soon as you start thinking that, then our ability to make sense of what we're viewing moves up as the audience, and your sense as an illustrator and designer can build on that by crafting your visual language to bring them in and hook your audience in from that. So state of firstness is where the first steps are, oh, that resembles something that I'm familiar with, which then leads you to state of secondness. And sign 4 in this 10 signs is referred to as the sign of experience, because we all have a lived experience, and this semiotic sign is one where it is focusing the power on people's experience. And as designers and illustrators, you can really help yourselves by crafting your work. And then finally, you have thirdness, top right hand corner, sign 10 is the sign of pure thirdness, because when you reach that point, everything is mediated. Everything that you've designed is mediated. So let's just think about what we've got there. Is if we looked at the colour red, and as first sign 1, you acknowledge it's red, but then you start thinking about, could this mean something else? Leads you to a state of secondness, where it starts to be relative to other things, pointing you towards things you already know that they may be trying to communicate or hook you in with. State of thirdness is where you acknowledge generally that when you see this, it means that. So when you see red in a particular pattern, you know that more than likely it's referring to Coca-Cola. That's a mediated position. Yeah, it's just grown in meaning that when we see this particular shape of red with a white background mostly, then that means Coca-Cola. That's when the state of thirdness happens. So to the things themselves. So if you think about the difference of firstness, secondness, and thirdness as I've outlined it to you, that we have firstness is just a state of being, that when we see red, that's a spontaneous moment when we go, okay, that's red. It's a spontaneous thing, as when you spot something, you spot it. You're not thinking about it, but you spot it. Then that's when semiotic signs can start to work. Because if you don't spot something, you just walk by and it doesn't work. So spontaneity is a state of firstness. It's when you get to the state of secondness that it becomes dependent. It is when we see this, it is driving us to make that assumption it is that. But then when we get to state of thirdness, it's about mediation, that when we see this in this particular way, it is this, because we agree it is this. Coca-Cola, for example. Okay, moving forward. Again, if we're to understand our target audience, to design and illustrate more effectively to communicate to them, then what we really are jumping in on is the ness part of this. So if you're having problems with firstness, secondness, and thirdness, forget about that. I know I've just done like 10 minutes or so just talking about it, but it's the ness bit. It's the state, the qualitative state of being. It's just a way of mapping that unconscious, subconscious way the brain works, that as designers, knowing iconic, indexical, and symbolic representation semiotically, you can start to hook them in. So in a state of firstness, you can get your target audience in with a state of firstness that you're using things that they're familiar with, red as an example, to then hook them in with, we're talking about rage here, we're talking about fire here, or we're talking about politics here, or we're talking about this here. And then you bring them into the state of thirdness when the audience themselves can make that connection, because you help mediate them to that position. We are actually talking about this. Just to reiterate where we are with firstness. So let's just focus in the second tweet here. The firstness is is whose being is simply in itself. Now, as humans, we exist no matter what, whether or not the colour red exists or not, or whatever else it is. And it doesn't refer to anything else. It just exists. That colour red, we exist. But as soon as you start recognising things, then we all naturally move to the state of secondness. And in the state of secondness, again, Peirce's language can get in the way. But let's just focus in on the first tweet. Peirce says he always distinctly said that the origin of genuine secondness was in experiencing. So it's not just about experiencing, it's about being in the moment of experiencing. Because at that point, you're looking at the world differently. And as part of that, that's what helps us as designers and illustrators to make connections to our audience by visually hooking them in. I mean, you can call that aesthetically, but it's hooking them in to then help with the visual language that you've chosen to take them on that visual journey as they're experiencing what they're looking at, to get more information out of what you've designed that they were maybe not intending to get. That will then lead you finally to the state of thirdness, where it's being mediated into exactly what they need to take home from your design. And that's the way you can actually engage in this state of phenomenology, which is basically about existence, about experience, about tapping into that target audience aspect of, as fellow humans, they experience things in the way they experience things. And if you can tap into understanding how your audience will approach things, then you can improve your visual language to actually hook them and keep them hooked. So next week, we're going to dig deeper into the state of firstness in the sense of illustration and graphic design, and what does that mean? How do we build on just the sense of red or whatever it is? So come back next week and we'll start digging deeper into phenomenology, and we'll start with firstness. But that's it for this week. So that was our 10 minutes of Peircean Semiosis 101 for this week. Phenomenology as a philosophy will be new to many of you designers and illustrators. The study of phenomena seems to be a large step away from the study of semiotic science in the context of visual communication design, doesn't it? But in reality, we are designing for other human beings who are situated in cultures, subcultures and social economic existences. Now, these human beings who will become our target audiences at some point all have an individual lived experience, plus a shared commonality of experience and references shared within their community. Now, this community of shared lived experience may be within a family, a clan, a tribe, a geographical region or country, but this community, thanks to the internet, may be dispersed globally. This, on the surface, for designers and illustrators may be insurmountable in attempting to understand them, but we know that we can research our audience in many granular ways to understand them, to design for them. Phenomenology is one way to understand the audience's lived experience. Peirce does not concern himself specifically with designers or illustrators' intended audiences. Instead, he is focused in on the fundamental categories of experience or consciousness within which his semiotic theory of semiosis works. Peirce thus defines three phenomenological categories: firstness, secondness and thirdness. Now, you've watched these videos before. You will know by now I unpack Peirce's problematic theoretical language, and through reframing it using design-centric language, make it relevant to designers and illustrators. So you will be pleased to know that over the next month I'll unpack how graphic design and illustration operate within Peirce's three phenomenological categories of firstness, secondness and thirdness. Yes, next week we will begin with firstness as a state in which we can understand how our audience begins to semiotically interpret our visual communications. Subscribe to be the first to watch that video. Hi, if you've watched these videos before, you probably know by now I'm Dave Wood, a design educator and researcher, a published design author, and I've worked commercially as both a freelance illustrator and graphic designer. The guy behind the theory, Charles Sanders Peirce, was a philosopher, a mathematician, and a theorist, but he wasn't a creative. Each week On this Scouse-Scot Semiosis 101 YouTube channel, I'll post at least one 10-minute explainer video on an aspect of Peirce's pragmatic semiotic theory. Each free Semiosis 101 10-minute video will use designer-centric terms instead of theoretical language so that illustrators and graphic designers can understand and follow. Each video will feature a take-home piece of applicable semiotic theory, and they do interconnect to build up your understanding of semiosis. But this channel is not a course in semiotics per se. Instead, each video is a bite-sized illustrated piece of new knowledge on sign action, or semiosis as Peirce names it. The aim of these free videos is to take Peirce's quite complex philosophical theoretical language and put it in the context of designing visual communication, whether these are illustrations, motion, branding, packaging, editorial, etc. By subscribing to this Scouse-Scot Semiosis 101 YouTube channel, you will learn how Peirce's pragmatic semiotic theory of semiosis can help to enhance and improve how you visually communicate. I have many more Peircean semiotic topics to discuss, but I'd be interested in hearing about your semiotic ideas. Add a comment below. If you like this video, check out my other semiotic videos and consider liking and sharing those videos with others. The more we creatives discuss semiotic theory, the easier its application into our creative processes will be. As a fellow creative and a published design author, I have a link in the description to my Scouse-Scot website where you can find all the Semiosis 101 videos and read background info on the blog. You can download free Semiosis 101 video transcripts and reading lists. You can buy illustrated and typographical gift ranges on my Redbubble shop. You can also buy my 2014 design book published by Bloomsbury Publishing, Interface Design and Introduction to Visual Communication in UI Design. Over the years, I have collaborated with other design academic researchers and Peircean semioticians to develop a designer-centric explanation of Peirce's theoretical language. If you are interested in reading my semiotic Rosetta Stone academic writing, then you can visit my academia.edu link in the description. Any other books on Peircean semiotics or design I've mentioned in the videos are also listed in the description. Check them out too. Thanks for watching. Check out the other videos, like and share them with your friends, and hit the bell and subscribe buttons to be notified when next week's video is published. You can also follow Semiosis 101 on the socials for updates. It's Scouse_Scot on Instagram and Semiosis 101 on Twitter. See you all again next week for more Semiosis 101 to help illustrators and designers to enhance your visual communication skills.